Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The evening rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of a Manhattan penthouse. Inside, the lights of the skyline shimmered like 1,000 distant promises. Ethan Hale stood by the glass, his reflection crisp in the pane. Tall, composed, every inch, the millionaire executive who built Hale Capital from the ground up. Yet behind that calm expression, a quiet storm brewed. On his desk lay an ivory envelope embossed with gold lettering. Engagement Gala, it read. Beneath it, the names that still made his pulse tighten: Vanessa Monroe and Daniel Fraser, his ex-girlfriend and his biggest business rival. Ethan exhaled the sound short and dry. Of course Vanessa would make her engagement a public event complete with journalists and investors. She always knew how to turn love into strategy. He turned away from the skyline and pressed the intercom button. Rachel, he said evenly to his assistant, I need a date for Friday night. Someone elegant, articulate, and discreet, and make sure she can act. Rachel hesitated. Act, sir? Ethan's eyes glinted. Yes, she needs to look like the woman I am in love with. Across the city, under the humming lights of a quiet art studio, Maya Tran wiped her paint-stained hands on an old apron. The rent was due tomorrow. Her father's medical bills stacked higher each week. She had already sold her car, her jewelry, even her mother's old record player. Still, it was never enough. Her phone buzzed, a message from a casting agency she sometimes worked with for small gigs. Client seeking a female companion for one evening event. Must appear confident in social settings. Payment $5,000. Maya stared at the screen, her chest tightening. $5,000. That was 2 months of hospital payments, the kind of money that could buy time. She swallowed hard and replied, I am available. 2 days later, she stood outside the glass tower of Hale Capital, clutching a borrowed blazer and her trembling resolve. The receptionist guided her to the top floor. As the elevator doors slid open, her breath caught. The office was minimalist, gleaming, every surface reflecting wealth and control. Behind the desk sat Ethan Hale. His dark hair was neatly styled, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored. He looked up from a file and froze. For a moment his professional mask slipped. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, those eyes, that small scar near her lip. Maya Tran, she introduced herself softly, extending her hand. I am here about the event this Friday. Ethan rose, shaking her hand, still studying her face. Yes, the event. His voice was lower now, thoughtful. You came highly recommended. She smiled politely, unaware that 10 years ago she had painted his portrait under a different name in a different life. Back then he had been just Ethan, the quiet boy from art class, who promised to write but never did. He gestured for her to sit. This is a simple arrangement. You will accompany me to an engagement party. You will act as if we are together. In exchange, I will pay you $5,000. Do you understand? Maya nodded slowly. I understand, but why me? Ethan leaned back, a faint smile touching his lips. You seem genuine. That is rare in my world. She hesitated, glancing at the contract he slid across the table. The paper smelled faintly of cologne and rain. 3 simple rules typed in precise lines: no personal questions, no emotional involvement, keep everything confidential. Maya took the pen, her hand trembling slightly as she signed. When she looked up, Ethan was watching, her expression unreadable. Welcome to the arrangement, Miss Tran, he said. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, but inside that office something deeper had already begun to stir, something neither of them had planned for, and both would soon have to face. The night of the engagement gala arrived sooner than either of them expected. The limousine glided through the glittering streets of Manhattan, its windows reflecting a city that seemed to never sleep. Inside, Ethan sat beside Maya, the tension between them quiet but unmistakable. Maya wore a midnight blue gown that shimmered under the car's soft lights. Her hair was swept back, her eyes framed with quiet determination. Ethan's gaze lingered a second too long before he looked away. "You do not have to look nervous," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "No one will question us if you stay calm." She forced a faint smile. "That is easy for you to say. You actually belong in that world." The corner of his mouth curved slightly. "For tonight, so do you." The car stopped in front of the Langford Hotel, where the gala was already in full swing. Flashing cameras painted the entrance in bursts of white. Ethan stepped out first, offering his hand. For a heartbeat, Maya hesitated before placing her hand in his. The warmth of his palm steadied her as they walked up the red carpet together. Inside, crystal chandeliers glowed above a sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns. The hum of champagne conversations filled the air. Ethan leaned close to her ear, his tone low. "Smile. They are all watching." Maya smiled, graceful but careful. Her eyes swept across the room until they landed on a woman in a crimson dress, Vanessa Monroe. Beautiful, poised, every bit the socialite Maya imagined she would be. Standing beside her was Daniel Fraser, tall and smug, his arm around her waist. Vanessa's smile tightened as Ethan approached with Maya. "Ethan," she said smoothly, her voice honeyed with surprise. "It has been too long, and this must be—" "Maya," Ethan said before Vanessa could finish. "My partner." Vanessa's eyes flicked over Maya's dress, her expression polite but sharp. "How lovely. You have always had unconventional taste." Maya felt her cheeks warm but kept her voice steady. Maybe that is because he finally decided to choose with his heart. The air shifted. Even Ethan looked slightly stunned. A few nearby guests had overheard whispering. Vanessa's smile faltered, then returned tighter than before. "Well," she said, lifting her glass cheers to unexpected love stories. As Vanessa drifted away with Daniel, Ethan exhaled quietly. "That was bold." Maya's lips curved. "You hired me to act. I am just doing my job." They moved through the crowd, exchanging polite nods and empty pleasantries. Yet every time Ethan looked at Maya, something unfamiliar stirred. She did not belong to this world of silent power plays and hollow smiles, and maybe that was exactly what drew him in. An older man approached, clasping Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan Hale, I did not expect to see you here." "And this must be the lucky lady." Ethan nodded. "Yes, this is Maya." The man turned to her with a grin. "You must be the reason our stone-hearted CEO finally shows up smiling." Laughter followed, light and teasing. Maya blushed, and Ethan's usual guardedness cracked into a real smile. For the first time in years, the evening felt human. Later, as the music swelled and couples drifted to the dance floor, Maya stood by the balcony looking out at the city lights. The night air was crisp, brushing against her skin. Ethan joined her quietly, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You handled yourself well," he said, handing her one. She took it with a small nod. "You mean I survived the sharks?" He chuckled softly. "Something like that." They stood in silence for a moment, the city glowing beneath them. Then Ethan said, almost to himself, "You remind me of someone I used to know." Maya turned to him, her heart tightening. Maybe she was someone important. She was, he admitted, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "But I let her go." Their eyes met, the air between them charged with something neither of them could name. Maya looked away first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then I hope this time you do not make the same mistake." Ethan did not answer. He only looked at her, the woman he thought he had hired for one night, wondering how, in a room full of strangers, she was the only one who felt familiar. The orchestra shifted to a slow, haunting melody. Without thinking, Ethan extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said. And as she placed her hand in his again, the contract they had signed just days ago began to feel like the smallest part of what was really happening between them. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of Ethan's office, catching the faint dust in the air. He had barely slept. The image of Maya standing under the chandeliers, her laugh quiet but real, kept replaying in his mind. It unsettled him. This was supposed to be an arrangement, a performance, nothing more. He loosened his tie and stared at the contract on his desk. 3 lines, 3 promises, no personal questions, no emotions, complete confidentiality. He had written them himself, yet now they felt like chains he could not escape. Rachel entered with her usual calm professionalism. The photos from last night's event are everywhere, she said, placing a tablet in front of him. Ethan glanced at the screen. Every major lifestyle blog had captured the same image, him and Maya on the balcony, her blue gown shimmering, his hand brushing hers as they laughed. The headline read, Ethan Hale's mystery woman stuns at Fraser Monroe Gala. Rachel smiled faintly. You should know, sir, the internet loves you again. He ignored her attempt at humor. Make sure she is not bothered by reporters, he said. Send security if needed. Yes, sir, she replied, leaving him to his thoughts. Across town, Maya was back in her small apartment, peeling off her borrowed jewelry and setting it carefully into the velvet box. Her phone vibrated non-stop calls from unknown numbers, emails asking for interviews, even a message from an old friend who had recognized her in a photo. She ignored them all. The night had felt like a dream, but now reality pressed in. The bills were still there. Her father was still in the hospital, and she was still just Maya pretending to be someone she was not. When she arrived at the hospital later that afternoon, her father was awake, smiling faintly through his oxygen mask. I saw you on the news, he said, his voice weak but teasing. My little girl looked like a movie star. Maya laughed softly, taking his hand. It was just a job, Dad. Nothing more. Maybe, he said, squeezing her fingers, but it looked like something real. That night, a sleek black car stopped outside her building. Ethan stepped out, dressed in his usual charcoal suit, but his expression was different, less guarded, almost nervous. He knocked lightly on her door. When she opened it, surprise flickered in her eyes. Ethan, what are you doing here? I wanted to see how you were doing, he said. The press can be cruel. She crossed her arms, wary. I can handle it. I have handled worse. He nodded, stepping inside when she gestured. The apartment was small walls, lined with sketches and half-finished paintings. A single plant sat by the window, leaning toward the light. You painted all these? He asked quietly. Yes, she said. It helps when things get hard. Ethan walked toward one canvas resting on an easel. It was a portrait of a winter street, two figures under falling snow. He froze. This one. I have seen it before. Maya's breath caught. You should. You bought it at a student art fair 10 years ago. Ethan turned to her, disbelief softening into realization. You were her, the girl with the paint on her hands. She met his gaze, voice trembling. You were the boy who said he would never forget me. Silence stretched between them, fragile but full. The city hummed faintly beyond the window, the same city that had torn them apart once before. Ethan exhaled slowly. I should have looked for you, and I should have told you my real name, she replied. Back then, I was too afraid you would see how little I had. He shook his head. You never needed anything to be enough. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The contract between them lay somewhere unseen, but its meaning had already changed. Ethan reached out, touching a streak of blue on her painting. You know, he said softly, that color was always my favorite. Maya smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. It still is mine. Outside, rain began to fall against the window pane, gentle and steady. The same rain that had once divided their worlds now seemed to bring them closer again. Ethan looked at her, the truth settling deep in his chest. What had started as an act, a contract written in cold ink, was turning into something real, something neither of them could hide any longer. For the next several weeks, the boundaries between arrangement and affection began to blur. The contract that once defined their distance was slowly dissolving into something neither could fully explain. Ethan and Maya found themselves spending more time together under the pretense of upcoming business events. What began as rehearsals, learning how to stand close, how to smile for the cameras, turned into quiet lunches, long conversations, and moments that stretched beyond their supposed agreement. One afternoon, Ethan brought her to his company's art division, a gallery space he rarely visited. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood. I did not know you owned a gallery, Maya said, tracing her fingers along a marble display stand. I do not talk about it much, Ethan replied. It started as a side project for local artists. I guess I never had time to finish what I started. She looked at him, her expression soft. Maybe it is not too late to finish it. He smiled faintly, watching her move through the room. You make everything sound simple. Maybe it is, she said. You just need to remember why you began. That evening they attended a charity gala together, another of those required appearances written in the contract. Yet tonight felt different. Maya wore a pale gold dress, the color catching the light like sunlight on water. As they entered the ballroom, every head turned. Reporters whispered her name. Guests who once doubted her now smiled as if they had always known her. But Maya's focus remained on Ethan, who stayed close, protective, without saying a word. When the host announced the silent auction, Maya wandered to a painting displayed on the main wall. It was a snowy street scene almost identical to the one she had painted years ago. She read the nameplate Anonymous Donor EH. She turned to him in surprise. "You bought it back," Ethan nodded. "I never sold it. I donated it to this foundation under my initials. I wanted it to inspire someone the way it once inspired me." Maya's throat tightened. "You kept it all this time," I told myself. It reminded me of a lesson he said quietly, that some mistakes are worth keeping. For a moment she forgot the crowd, the cameras, everything. "Ethan, why did you really hire me?" He hesitated, searching her face. "At first I wanted to prove something. To Vanessa, to myself, that I could move on. But then you walked into my office and it felt like I had known you my entire life. I just did not realize why." Before Maya could answer, a sharp voice interrupted. "Well, that is touching," Vanessa said, appearing beside them with a champagne flute in hand. "Tell me, Maya, how much does he pay you for this performance?" The crowd turned, drawn by the sudden tension. Maya froze, the color draining from her face. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Vanessa, that is enough." "Oh, come on, Ethan," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Do you really think people believe this fairy tale? Everyone knows you cannot stand to lose. Not in business, not in love." Maya's chest ached, but she stood her ground. "You are right," she said, voice trembling but firm. "I am not part of his world, but maybe that is exactly what he needs." The room fell silent. Even Vanessa seemed caught off guard. Ethan took Maya's hand, his voice steady. "This conversation is over." He led her away from the crowd, out through the terrace doors. The cold night air hit them both sharp and clean. "I am sorry," Ethan said, his voice low. "You did not deserve that." Maya shook her head. "You do not need to apologize. I knew this was temporary." He looked at her, then the city lights flickering in his eyes. "What if I do not want it to be temporary anymore?" Maya's breath caught. "Ethan, you cannot mean that. This was a contract." "Maybe it started that way," he said softly. "But every time I see you, it feels less like an agreement and more like the truth I have been running from." The words hung between them, fragile as glass. Maya stepped back, uncertain whether to believe him. Before she could answer, a flash from the terrace corner caught their attention. Someone had been taking photos. A reporter ducked away into the dark, disappearing into the night. And just like that, the secret they had both been protecting was no longer safe. The next morning, chaos erupted. Every major news outlet carried the same headline: Ethan Hale's secret contract, romance exposed. Photos from the gala terrace splashed across every screen. Maya in his arms, the hint of a kiss, the signed agreement in a reporter's hand. Ethan's phone did not stop ringing. The board wanted explanations. Investors demanded damage control. Vanessa had made her move. The leak was perfectly timed, and the world believed exactly what she wanted them to, that Ethan Hale had paid a struggling woman to play his lover. In the middle of it all, Maya sat alone in her apartment, watching her face appear on television. The words stung Gold Digger. Fraud. Fake relationship for attention. She turned off the screen, her chest heavy. The contract that once promised safety had turned into a weapon against her. A sharp knock came at the door. When she opened it, Ethan stood there. His suit wrinkled, his expression torn between fury and regret. "I should have protected you," he said. "I did not think Vanessa would go this far." Maya shook her head, her voice unsteady. "You told me everything would stay private. You promised." "I know," he said quietly, "and I broke that promise." She stepped back, trying to steady her breathing. "I cannot do this anymore, Ethan. Not like this. My father saw those headlines. My students saw them. Everyone thinks I sold myself to you." He moved closer, desperation in his tone. "I can fix it. I will hold a press conference. I will tell them the truth." "The truth," she whispered. "That we lied from the beginning. That I was a contract on paper." Ethan froze, realizing she was right. "Maya, please. What I feel for you now is not part of any contract." She looked up, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Maybe not, but the world will never believe that." For a long moment they stood in silence. Then she placed the small velvet box in his hand, the one that had held her earrings the first night they met. "Keep this," she said softly. "It belongs to your world, not mine." When the door closed, Ethan stood in the hallway, the weight of everything crashing down on him. The cameras, the lies, the headlines, they all blurred together. For the first time in years, he did not know how to fight back. That evening, his board of directors called an emergency meeting. Daniel Fraser sat among them now, smug and composed. "We cannot afford this scandal," Daniel said. "Step down temporarily, Ethan. Let me stabilize the company while you clean up your personal mess." Ethan's jaw tightened. He understood what was happening. Vanessa's leak had been designed not just to humiliate him, but to strip him of power. As the meeting ended, Ethan looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Maya was alone, bearing the cost of his mistake. The only way to set things right was to tell the truth, every piece of it. He picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Rachel, schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning," he said. "No prepared statements. I will speak for myself." For once, there would be no rehearsed words, no polished act, no hiding behind contracts. Ethan Hale was finally ready to tell the world that what began as a performance had become the truest thing he had ever known. The next morning, a gray drizzle hung over Manhattan, and the press gathered in front of Hale Capital's headquarters. Cameras flashed, microphones lined the podium, and reporters murmured as they waited for Ethan Hale to appear. Inside the building, Ethan stood before a mirror, adjusting his tie with unsteady hands. He had faced investors, governments, and hostile takeovers, but never anything like this. Today was not about business, it was about truth. Rachel entered quietly. "They are ready for you," she said. Ethan nodded. "Thank you, Rachel, for everything." She hesitated, then said softly, "Whatever you say out there, make sure it is from the heart. That is what people will remember." Ethan stepped outside into the storm of cameras and questions. The noise was deafening. "Mr. Hale, is it true you paid Maya Tran to be your girlfriend? Was your relationship real? Are you resigning?" He raised his hand and the crowd fell silent. His voice was calm but steady. "Yes," he said. "It is true that Maya Tran was hired to accompany me to an event. It began as a business arrangement, and I take full responsibility for that decision." Flashes exploded. The reporters leaned forward. Ethan continued, "But what began as an act became something I never expected. I met someone who reminded me what honesty feels like, what kindness looks like. She is not a fraud, and she is not a gold digger. She is the most genuine person I have ever known." His words echoed against the marble walls of the plaza. "I will not hide behind my title or my wealth anymore. I made a mistake, and I hurt her in the process. If there is any justice left in this city, let it start with telling the truth." For a moment no one spoke. Then someone asked, "Where is she now?" Ethan paused, his eyes distant. "I do not know, but I hope she is watching." The press conference ended in stunned silence. Within hours, every news outlet replayed his speech. The narrative began to shift. Some called it reckless, others called it brave. Across town, in the quiet of her father's hospital room, Maya watched the broadcast on a small television. Ethan's face filled the screen, earnest, unguarded, nothing like the man she had first met in his glass tower. Her father smiled faintly. "Seems like he finally learned how to tell the truth." Maya blinked back tears. "Maybe, but the world can be cruel." "True," her father said, squeezing her hand. "But courage changes the story." Later that evening, as rain streaked down the hospital windows, Maya opened her sketchbook and began to draw. Her hands trembled slightly, but the lines took shape, a man standing under the rain. His suit soaked his eyes, full of regret. She closed the book and whispered, "You kept your promise this time." Meanwhile, in the quiet of his penthouse, Ethan stood by the window watching the same rain fall. The city lights blurred through the glass. For the first time in years, he felt stripped of everything, his reputation, his armor, his control, but somehow freer. He whispered to himself, "It is not over, not yet." The storm outside raged on, but deep down both of them knew that truth once spoken could never be silenced again. 2 days later, the storm had passed, but the aftermath remained. News anchors still debated Ethan Hale's confession, calling it the boldest move of his career. Some said it was a desperate attempt to save his company. Others called it an act of redemption. Inside Hale Capital, the atmosphere was tense. The boardroom was filled with murmurs and folded arms. Daniel Fraser sat across from Ethan, his smile thin and smug. "You turned the company into a circus," Daniel said. "The shareholders want stability, not drama." Ethan kept his voice steady. "They want leadership built on integrity. I have already met with the major investors. They know my priorities have not changed." Daniel leaned forward. "You are losing your grip, Ethan. Resign before they vote you out." Ethan met his gaze, calm and deliberate. "The only thing I'm losing is the weight of pretending." Daniel's smirk faltered. The meeting ended with no resolution, but Ethan knew what was coming. A vote of no confidence was scheduled for the following week. His empire was hanging by a thread. That evening, Ethan returned to his penthouse. The city below glimmered like nothing had happened yet. Everything had changed. On the table sat a small envelope slid under his door earlier that day. There was no return address, only his name written in familiar handwriting. He opened it carefully. Inside was a sketch, his silhouette standing under rain. At the bottom, a single line in soft pencil. "You told the truth." That was enough. Ethan stared at the drawing, a quiet warmth spreading through his chest. She had seen the press conference. She had forgiven him even if she was not ready to return. The next morning, while the city buzzed with rumors of corporate shifts, Ethan made his move. He walked into the boardroom and placed a document on the table. "I am not stepping down," he said simply, "but I am restructuring Hale Capital. From today, 20% of profits go to the Art for Hearts Foundation. It will fund medical care and art scholarships for underprivileged families." The room fell silent. Daniel laughed, but it sounded forced. "You think charity will save your image?" Ethan met his eyes, unflinching. "No. It will remind me what my image was supposed to mean." By evening, news of the announcement broke across the internet. Public opinion shifted again. Ethan Hale's reputation, once stained by scandal, was now painted with unexpected humility. Maya saw the report on her phone as she left the hospital that night. A small smile touched her lips. "Art for Heart," she whispered. He remembered. She stood for a moment under the city lights, her coat pulled close against the cold. The wind carried the faint sound of a street violinist playing an old romantic tune. For the first time in weeks, her heart felt light. Across town, Ethan walked alone through the same city, his steps echoing along the wet pavement. He stopped in front of a small art supply store, the kind he imagined Maya would have loved. Inside the window display sat a painting, a quiet skyline after the storm. He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth softening. "You were right," he murmured. "It is never too late to finish what you started." The camera flashes, the gossip, the noise, all of it had faded into the distance. What remained was something fragile but real. The world now saw a man rebuilding his empire. But underneath it all, Ethan knew he was rebuilding something far more valuable. His heart, one honest choice at a time. A week later, the headquarters of Hale Capital buzzed with reporters again, but this time the mood was different. Ethan's decision to redirect part of the company's profits to charity had sparked a wave of support. Investors who once doubted him were now praising his leadership. Yet despite the applause, Ethan felt something missing. The one person who had changed everything was still gone. That morning, as he prepared for the annual investor summit, Rachel entered his office carrying a small invitation envelope. "This was delivered for you," she said. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation card printed with elegant cursive letters, the grand opening of the Art for Hearts Gallery, in partnership with the Hale Foundation. Below that was written "Curated by Maya Tran." For a moment Ethan could not speak. His chest tightened, a mixture of pride and disbelief washing over him. Without a word he stood up, grabbed his coat, and left the office. That evening the gallery glowed under strings of golden lights. The place was filled with paintings donated by local artists, each piece telling a story of healing loss and hope. Ethan walked through the crowd quietly, his heart racing as he scanned the room. Then he saw her. Maya stood near a display wall, dressed simply in a cream-colored dress, her hair tied back. She was smiling, as she explained one of the pieces to a group of guests. The moment she looked up and saw Ethan, her words faltered, and for a heartbeat the noise of the room faded. He approached slowly. "You could have told me," he said gently. Her smile was small but warm. "I was not sure you would come. I would have come anywhere," he said, "especially here." They stood facing one another, surrounded by the quiet hum of admiration. On the main wall behind them hung a single painting titled "The First Snow." It was the same piece she had painted 10 years ago, the one he had bought and kept all these years. Now it bore a new signature, Maya Tran Hale Foundation Exhibit. Ethan's eyes softened. "You used it as the opening piece." It was the beginning of everything, she said softly. Of who we were, of what we lost. He took a slow breath, and maybe what we found again. Vanessa appeared briefly near the gallery entrance, watching from a distance. Her face tightened when she saw the two of them together. But instead of approaching, she turned and left quietly, the sound of her heels fading into the night. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the same velvet box Maya had given back to him. Inside was a small silver ring, simple yet elegant. He opened it in his palm. This time, he said, his voice trembling slightly, "There is no contract, no terms, no pretense. Just me asking you one honest question." Maya blinked, her breath catching. "Ethan, will you give us another chance?" he asked. Not the one built on paper, but the one built on truth. Tears welled in her eyes, glimmering under the golden lights. "You already have it," she whispered. The guests around them applauded softly as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. The music swelled tender and full, and for the first time since their first meeting, neither of them felt like actors in someone else's story. For them, the performance was over. What remained was real, the kind of love that needed no signatures, only courage to begin again. 6 months later, the morning sun poured through the tall windows of the Art for Hearts gallery. A soft piano melody filled the air as guests began arriving, dressed in elegant shades of ivory and gold. The walls were lined with paintings from artists across the country, but in the center of the room stood one piece framed in crystal glass, The First Snow, now carrying 2 signatures at the bottom, Maya Tran and Ethan Hale. It was their wedding day. The ceremony was small, intimate, and filled with the people who had stood by them through every storm. Ethan's mother sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly, pride glimmering in her eyes. Rachel smiled beside her, wiping away a tear she tried to hide. Maya walked down the short aisle, her steps steady, her dress simple and timeless. There were no flashing cameras, no magazine headlines, no boardroom whispers, only the quiet hum of genuine happiness. When she reached Ethan, he took her hands, his voice low but sure. "I once wrote rules to keep my life under control," he said. "No emotions, no surprises, no vulnerability. But then you walked into my office and you broke every one of them. And somehow that made everything right again." Maya smiled, her eyes glistening. "And I once promised myself I would never fall for a man with a contract," she said. "But you taught me that love does not need signatures, only trust." The officiant smiled gently. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Applause rose softly as Ethan leaned in and kissed her. It was not the grand cinematic kind of kiss, it was slow, steady, and full of everything they had endured to reach this moment. Later that evening, the reception was held on the gallery's rooftop terrace. The city stretched wide below them, bathed in amber light. Guests laughed, danced, and toasted under a sky painted with stars. Ethan stood near the railing, looking out over the skyline. "You know," he said quietly, turning to Maya beside him, "for years I thought success was about numbers, buildings, and contracts. But it turns out it was always about finding someone who made me feel human again." Maya rested her head on his shoulder. "Then we both found what we were missing." As the first snow of winter began to fall, soft flakes drifting through the city glow, Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the original contract, the one they had both signed so many months ago. Without a word, he tore it in half. The paper fluttered away in the breeze, disappearing into the night. "No contracts," he whispered. "Just forever." Maya smiled, tightening her hold on him. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in quiet white. Down below, the sign outside the gallery glowed softly, Art for hearts, a place where love builds more than walls. Ethan turned to her one last time, his voice warm and full of peace. You were the best mistake I ever made. And as they stood beneath the falling snow, surrounded by laughter, light, and the hum of a city that had once judged them, Ethan and Maya finally had what neither money nor contracts could ever buy, a love that was honest, earned, and eternal.